Hi everyone, I'm Asmo and I wanted to share my 5 cents pertaining to the current discussion surrounding the game balance in Path of Exile 2. Before I say anything else, I'd like to give credit to Nugian, who has helped me see things from a more constructive perspective, and some of the solutions that I want to share come directly from his ideas. So let's first focus on the perceived and expressed problems that people bring up, and then on what could cause them, and lastly on good and bad ways to try solving them. There are players who express discontent with their relative lack of power compared to monsters. The complaints are mostly centered around the monster versus player power, the speed of players and monsters, whether they're having fun or not, and the general issues with game balance, which include mostly complaints about things being underpowered. And the first thing we need to do is to separate the concerns, because all of these issues and complaints have real reasons and real causes, which we will address. However, the vast majority of them are simply opinions, and I can understand why all of the complaints happen and still disagree with most of them. And ultimately, GGG designs the game, and we share our opinions, and we should not feel entitled to the game being one way or another. Sometimes the game is just not for you, and that's okay. But I do have some constructive feedback that I think will help the community see things from a very clear and calm perspective, as well as solutions for GGG to make the game better for people who are struggling with it. The general causes of the aforementioned problems can be divided into 3 main categories: player knowledge and skill, game balance, and luck. There are causes of these issues that will always remain a variable with little to no way of controlling it, because you cannot change the fact that some players will be much better or worse than others. The best you can do is to help teach the weaker players the right approach to the game, and that's what content creators do, and I try to play my part in that as well. This skill and knowledge gap tends to be actually underemphasized and underestimated by the community. The disparity between players is quite a lot bigger than most people think, and it does need to be taken into account. If you compare a new player and see how they do compared to a great build maker like Rutu or a seasoned veteran like Pox, you will notice a big difference. But even between players who should be closer in skill level, that difference can be still very apparent. And I'm bringing this particular example because I happened to see their Act 2 Torgul fights. Since we are all playing the same archetype, we're playing elemental spears, and I was just checking on the progress of other spear players. Rutu took 2 minutes and 1 second for the fight, and the experience looked like this.
Are you having fun now? And I'm just tickling him, dude. I'm just literally tickling this motherfucker, dude. I'm just like going, tickle, tickle. Are you having fun, little baby? And it's just like, what the fuck? I'm not even playing an ARPG anymore. I'm just goddamn tickling a goddamn baby, because that's what my character does, dude.
Pox took 1 minute and 28 seconds for the fight, and that's how his fight looked like.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Bro, that didn't do like any damage. Like, my autos are just stronger. Why? I mean, it has no support, so maybe that's why? But that like consumed my shock. I thought it was gonna do big damage.
And my time took just 32 seconds. Really good damage. He gets hit by a lot of things. Dude, that's sick. That was so much damage. And if someone can do 4 times the damage of another good player playing the same archetype that early in the game, then compared to a worse player, that difference is probably quite substantial. So this is very important to understand, because this part of the equation will always be unsolvable, and we need to accept this fact and focus on other causes instead. So game balance, for example, can be solved to an extent. Over time, the gap between the best and worst abilities should be narrowing down, and the gap will always exist, but it is not necessarily a bad thing that there is a difference. But what needs to be taken care of is the outliers from both ends. GGG is doing mostly a very good job at bringing down the overpowered builds that are head and shoulders above everything else, and I'd like to actually commend them for becoming a little bit better at buffing the weak skills and builds compared to their POE 1 balance patches. But But what needs to be avoided is this knee-jerk reaction that is proportional to the severity of the outrage rather than the magnitude of the issue itself. This cycle of appeasement and then subsequent nerfs resulting from it feeds the very negative part of this community. GGG should allow for like at least a week for people to find ways to use the available tools before completely altering the design of the game. The early feedback should be received, but GGG should be the ultimate judge and only change what they can see to be imbalanced from a rational and empirically supported perspective, not just on the basis of the degree of outrage. And because of these exaggerated complaints, 3 days into this patch 0.2, Lightning Spear received a buff, and it was already the best solo clearing skill for the Spear archetype before the changes. So after me and some other content creators shared their builds that feature it, it is now played by 41% of the ladder at the time of making this video. And anticipatedly, some of that is due to the Huntress being a new class that a lot of people want to try, but it is still just one Spear skill played by nearly half of the Trade League ladder. And now if GGG understandably nerf it in the future, it will affect a huge number of people, some of which will continue in this cycle of self-inflicted feedback loop of uninformed feedback misshaping the game balance. This cycle has been happening for a really long time since POE 1. For example, in the Necropolis League, on the launch weekend, people were immediately claiming that Necropolis crafting is useless and you cannot make anything good with it. It got immediately buffed, and the same day people figured out how to print 61 weapons, 4 of them at a time. There was also valid feedback about the tedious nature and bad QOL of the system, but that was not improved much upon because paradoxically, only the misguided feedback received a reaction. All it takes is a single player out of hundreds of thousands of players to share their method, and everyone in the community who cares to look becomes stronger. If you learn about one support gem that you didn't know you can use before and a better way to sequence your skills, you can easily do 50% more damage. That's why it is not wise to listen to people that imply that they know everything and have exhausted all possibilities while they're claiming that this class is unplayable or beating this is impossible. Discovering and proliferating build ideas to the community takes some time, and both the community and the developers need to understand it and give players some time to find the actual balance of things. And that being said, the game should also be still playable for people who miss on the non-obvious methods and solutions, which is why it is important to bring the bottom line up and also attempt to educate players through the game design about the right ways to approach it. The cause of the current balance issues, which has the most potential for an actual solution, is the perceived lack of power due to gear, specifically caused by poor RNG. Getting unlucky on your rune drops, getting unlucky on your weapon drops, getting unlucky on crafting currency. If that happens to me, I will manage. I know every place in the campaign with guaranteed item rewards, I know how to optimally manage my currency, so even with the worst luck conceivable, I will still progress without major issues. It will just take a little longer. However, if that happens to a worse player or a new player that doesn't have the knowledge to compensate for their bad luck yet, they will suddenly end up below the expected power level assumed by the developers, and they will struggle to progress through the game. But the solution to that cannot be lowering the expected power level to match the bad RNG runs, because with any standard distribution of luck across the player base, the vast majority will be in the middle of the curve and suddenly find themselves with zero challenge. So what needs to happen is actually giving players more chances or more dice rolls to reduce the variance in the minimum outcomes. Imagine you're rolling dice and the game requires you to get at least 4 on one of your rolls to beat it. The number 4 represents the minimum level of gear that is expected by the game developers, which the game is balanced around. If you have only 1 roll, you have 50% chance to lose. If you have 2 rolls, that is 25% chance to lose. And if you have 10 rolls, that is only 0.097% chance to lose. Every roll you add increases the chances to meet the minimum requirement and reduces your chances to be unlucky. And keep in mind that no matter how many times you roll, the highest number you can get is 6. Remember that for later. This is why giving players more loot or gearing options in the campaign could help minimize the impact of bad luck on their experience and make the game easier to balance as well. The baseline of item acquisition rate in campaign should be increased while also nerfing the endgame scaling of it, and this way the endgame can keep the same amount of loot as as before, but the campaign would be better at providing people with gearing options. In cases of giving players exceptional loot, it is best placed where the reward is also expected. A good example of that is Viper Napuazi fight, which guarantees a T2 support gem, sometimes the first one that a player will find, and unlocking this new and significant power as a reward for a challenging fight is good design. And another good example is the presence of these little loot camps and rare chests that spawn in dead ends that reward players for exploration and allow them to gear up if needed. However, these could be perhaps a little bit buffed. As I've mentioned before, the important aspect of solving the player power issues this way is that it does not change the maximum possible outcome. So the maximum possible power that players have at their disposal is remaining the same. The item modifiers are still gated behind levels, and players have limited item slots. So the luckiest player can only get as strong as those restrictions allow, because even if he found 10 perfect gothic quarterstaves, he can only use one at a time. But the difference between someone not finding a good weapon and finding a single good weapon is actually massive. There are some more elegant solutions besides just increasing the loot that can help with fixing the gearing issues, and this one in particular was suggested by Nugian, which is that runes should sell for a meaningful amount of gold. And this would ensure that a player can either get their power by using runes that help their character, or he can sell them and use the gold to buy or gamble for items that help their character, if what they found was not helpful to them. Either way, the minimum benefit that the player gets from them increases and the maximum remains the same. So to summarize, GGG and the community should look for ways to increase the minimum power level of players that do not increase the average or the maximum power level of players. So in essence, reducing the impact of bad RNG. And this should help keep the game challenging but not impossible to new players who got also unlucky on top of that. And the community needs to be a little bit more patient, because with more skills, supports, classes, passives, weapons, etc. added in the early access over the next few months, there will be power creep, and things that are weak now will have their good uses in the future. And if you keep asking for the average power level to be higher now, you will inevitably cause things to get nerfed in the future. I also wanted to make a small note on GGG messaging, because GGG clearly want to make a game that will be challenging. You're washed out on the riverbank in the harsh and unforgiving world with nothing but some rags on your back, and you need to claw your way upwards, gaining power and experience as you slay tougher and tougher enemies. This is somewhat inconsistent with actual GGG messaging, because Jonathan and Mark tend to beat around the bush a little bit in order to appease the discontent section of the player base, which is scared off by that challenge. They say that they just want engaging combat or things to like matter, and that they don't care about really slowing players down and making it seem like they kind of agree with people who want an easygoing game. And this kind of like safe talk makes players think that they're gonna be just fine and things will take care of themselves, and it doesn't prepare them for a tough and challenging path with lots of difficulties and problems to overcome. I personally prefer the game to be challenging and difficult, and I think that monsters should try to kill you, and they should be able to succeed at least early on. Otherwise, there's nothing to overcome and the game loses the meaning. And if that's what the game developers intend to release, they should communicate that message as well and tell people that the game is hard, but overcoming the challenge will be fun and rewarding. It might take someone twice as long, but that should enhance their satisfaction with the game, because the reward should be worth it and the baseline game will get easier as you progress and learn more. So TLDR, GGG should allow players to get more gear in the campaign to reduce the effects of bad RNG. GGG should wait a little bit longer before over-buffing things, because people are often wrong at the beginning of the league. GGG should also do a better job at messaging the challenging nature of the game, both in the interviews and also in-game, and the challenges should be rewarded, and the community should understand that the game is challenging and work together to find the solutions. And also the community outrage should not be rewarded if it's not backed by empirical data, and since it takes time to gather it, the community needs to relax a little bit with the early league claims. And that's my opinion on the matter. If you want GGG to give us more gear in the campaign, smash the like button, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.